The slave trade was a cruel, inhumane business. Not only was it humiliating to be bought and sold at the will of others, it meant the separation of families and the uncertainty of people's futures. The auction block played a big part of the slave market. Being the most profitable slave sale method, it was quickly adopted and modified by slave traders in order to rack up the most income. Before a slave ship was due to dock, posters like these were put up all around the area to advertise the auction. Many traders liked to stress the good condition of their slaves. It was also common for them to notify which diseases they were already immune to. Word of auctions were also spread by mouth, newspapers, telegraphs, and other means of communication. Before auctions took place, slaves were often kept in slave pens or jails. There were two main types of slave auctions. The first and more traditional way was the sold to the highest bidder method. This was when potential buyers would examine the merchandise beforehand. Then, based on the inspections made by the bidders, the auctioneer would come up with a starting price. From then on, the price would change with every bid placed. As its name implies, the buyer who bids the most gets the slave he or she wants. The second method is known as the grab-and-go auction, or as the refuse auction. During these types of auctions, the buyers would pay the auctioneer a fixed price in advance. In return, they would receive a ticket determining how many slaves they had paid for. These tickets were redeemed as buyers grabbed all of the slaves that they liked the look of. In order to obtain the highest profit possible, slave traders often used several procedures to hide blemishes that could hurt their sales. One such example would be how traders frequently covered the slaves' backs with hot tar or oil. This was most commonly done to hide whip scars because they were evidence that the slave had a rebellious and unruly attitude. In the richer areas, slaves were washed quickly and were sometimes given, if they were lucky, new clothes. In an account given by Solomon Northup, he stated that, "We were required to wash thoroughly. We were then furnished with a new suit each, cheap but clean. During the day he exercised us in the art of looking smart." Northup, born a free man, was kidnapped in 1841. He was one of many free African Americans to be caught and put back into slavery. Besides looking clean, traders also wanted their slaves to appear healthy to buyers. To save the most money possible, slaves were only fed a few days in advance. Several trading companies who thought ahead ordered their slaves to dance on ship decks as they were being transported from Africa to the U.S. on the Middle Passage. This was done to keep them fit. Having your value be determined by others was a humiliating procedure. As many slave accounts imply, they were treated like animals that were to be bought and sold with no regard to their well-being, personal interest, or happiness. This feeling of being property was reinforced when buyers would conduct physical and health inspections. Before the auctions, bidders were free to examine the slaves. They often asked the slaves to perform physical challenges in order to check for defects, such as stiff limbs or sore muscles. Several of these checks conducted were feeling their limbs and checking their teeth. Slaves were also questioned on what useful chores or qualities they possessed. Of course, the auction block was an extremely emotional event. Since the healthiest and strongest of slaves were the ones in great demand, it was inevitable that families would be split up. Some states had laws that prevented the separation of children under the age of 8 from at least one family member. However, these laws were rarely enforced as it damaged sales. Slavery was supposedly eradicated at the end of the Civil War in 1865. Unfortunately, it is still a practice that is carried on today. However, modern times have called for traders to modify their methods. Auctions are very rarely used nowadays in the slave market, if used at all, due to the necessary secrecy